Oh, you're saying, give war a chance!
So, you're probably asking yourself right now, who even is Gunther Fehlinger? Well, imagine the chaos god Korn, the god of war, hatred, murder, and all that good stuff. Now, multiply that by 10, and you'll have less than 1% of Gunther Fellinger's sheer desire for war. To put it simply, Gunther is NATO's strongest warhawk, having called for the balkanization and dissolution of... Hold on, let me check my list here. Russia, China, India, Brazil, Iran, Syria, Ethiopia, and probably more if you look at all of his Twitter posts. But let's be for real. Gunther Fellinger, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your political beliefs, has no real influence on NATO decision making. But what if he did? In order to find out, we'll have to skip forward to 2027, where, due to a totally unintentional fumbling of the European war, the Russians would storm over Europe and swallow up much of the East, as well as forcing the remaining members of NATO into a humiliating peace treaty. In the aftermath, the German economy would collapse under the stress of wartime production, and the general quality of life would plummet. Still, we got off pretty easily compared to France and Spain, who both fell into civil wars. But real quick, is it just me or does every single Hoi for Alt history mod have to have a Spanish civil war? Anyway, the NATO alliance was sadly forced to dissolve as, you know, two of its members were failed states that had fallen into civil war, but don't worry, this wouldn't be for very long. Following a meeting of European leaders in Brussels, they would discover that the big bad evil guy could only be defeated with the power of friendship. And so, Germany and the Low Countries would merge together to form the European Union. Thankfully for the European people, they would not be eating the bugs in this playthrough. However, they were going to be conscripted, and I can't guarantee that their last moments won't be filmed by a drone and posted on r/combat footage. We would also still have to conduct the Great Reset, but this time we went with the more vanilla option of corporate governance. So I guess nothing changed? In other news, the English were the fourth European country to fall into a civil war as the pro-EU faction rebelled against Nigel Farage. Right from the beginning, I did not have high hopes for our intervention. Rightfully so, as we were limited to a measly 2 volunteers. Still, we gave it our best and even managed to encircle a few British divisions.
Epic dub.
But I had made a critical blunder by leaving the other side of the front open for the Brits to counterattack. The loss of Manchester was the final nail in the coffin, and the rebels would surrender to Nigel.
Brexit success.
All in all though, it wasn't really a big deal, as we would be back soon to finish the job ourselves. In the meantime, we declared a government of national emergency, conveniently absorbing all the other parties into our coalition to make voting a little easier now that there's only one option. It's almost like we're managing democracy. It was now that the man you've all been waiting for would finally step into the limelight, as Gunther Fellinger would announce his run for president of the EU on his X account, and somehow actually won. Oh boy, I can't wait to see what his portrait looks like.
Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
With Gunther now in charge, we got a whole new focus tree to end the silly concept of neutrality and unite the rest of Europe into a final apocalyptic war against Russia. The first order of business was to restore the NATO alliance and bring the remaining free nations of Europe into the fold. But surprisingly, when our fellow European brothers in Spain, Italy, and Poland were informed of our plan to permanently balkanize Russia into a myriad of highly unstable failed states, they did not want to go along. And so, we had no choice but to re-educate these oppressed nations with a firm but fair military intervention. And first on the chopping block were the Brits, as we would declare war on them using Gunther's X account. Although our naval landing force was a measly 10 divisions, I was pretty confident, seeing as we had already inflicted heavy casualties on them with just 2 volunteers. But as a surprise to nobody but myself, the invasion went about as well as the Bay of Pigs. In the meantime, we prepared for our invasion of Italy. Austria, which was the homeland of Gunther Fellinger himself, as well as another very naughty man who we will not name, joined us without a fight. Next, we reminded the Swiss of what happens to countries that decide to call themselves neutral next to a large European power.
Yo, by the way, we're declaring our neutrality in this conflict between you and France, if that's okay with you.
But with both of them out of the picture, we could attack Italy on a much wider front line. The only problem being, that front line was a massive mountain range. Still, we crossed some parts of the Alps but quickly got bogged down by the surprising level of Italian resistance. Seriously, if the Italians had fought the Russians nearly as hard as they fought us, we would have already won the European war. My complaining aside, with our advance into Italy completely stalled, we would turn our focus towards Poland and the Czech Republic. To be honest, I find it hard to believe that the Polish would give up on the perfect chance to get revenge on Russia, but it is what it is. Anyway, we launched a naval invasion of Italy to finally break the stalemate, and for the first time in this playthrough, our special naval operation was a complete success, allowing our army to spread out into the rest of Italy until they would surrender. Except, they didn't surrender. You see, since the mod adds separate provinces for the cities of San Marino and the Vatican, the entire Italian army could simply retreat into those tiles and endlessly reinforce the same tile over and over again. Now, forgive me, but I don't think the Vatican City could sustain and shelter over 50,000 Italian troops, so I opened the console and did a thing. While that was being sorted out, we embarked on another family-friendly NATO adventure to the Balkans, where, luckily, we didn't deploy our air force so that the Serbs couldn't shoot down one of our planes and hold it over us for the rest of all eternity. Also, I think I should point out that the Serbs and Albanians were literally fighting side by side against us. Like, how bad do you have to be for those two to team up against you? Unfortunately, I did lose the footage for our invasions of Iberia, the UK, and Scandinavia, but they were little more than appetizers anyway. And with all of our appetizers finished, we would soon be getting onto the main course. But before we could do that, we had to finish our own focus tree first. As it turns out, Gunther's plans were not only limited to Europe. Instead, he sought to end neutrality and spread democracy worldwide.
I don't like where this is going.
And we had to decide what course of action to take, between helping Japan in the upcoming Great Asian War or invading the Middle East again. Now, as much as I would like to return China to its normal state in Hoi4 mods, that usually being a mess of 50 different warlords, they hadn't declared the war yet. So, as the saying goes, it's never too late to invade the Middle East. But before we could do any of that, we still had to take out the Russians. Years of buildup had led to this very moment, and with our armies on the border, it was time to finally get our revenge.
I called for peace, and I called for peace by victory and revolution.
As soon as the war began, we somehow achieved total surprise against the CSTO, blitzing through the thinly manned Polish and Balkan lines. How the Russians didn't see this war coming with someone like Gunther in charge is anyone's guess. Our naval invasion landed practically uncontested along the Baltic coast, and in the north we moved in to liberate the Finns who had been puppeted by Russia. The Russian lines finally began to consolidate once we pushed further and further into Eastern Europe, but it was too little, too late, as we could easily battle plan them and push them back. Not only were we winning on the ground, but we were also winning the propaganda war, as Gunther would post pictures of his workouts on X. Like, jokes aside, if you put him up against the world leaders he doesn't like, he's gonna win 99% of those fights. Okay, that's enough glazing, let's get back to the war. We were able to battle plan through pretty much all of Ukraine and the Baltics to finally reach Russia proper. Soon after, we would launch a naval invasion to help capture St. Petersburg. Immediately, things were already bad as our landing force failed to capture any ports. Soon after that, Russian reinforcements arrived and surrounded our units. Despite our valiant attempts to break through and save them, they surrendered, but were gracefully rewarded with a lifetime stay at a beachside resort in Norilsk. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we lost 2 aircraft carriers in a battle with the Russian Navy. Yeah. Still, we quickly got back on the offensive and broke through in southern Ukraine, encircling the Russians in Crimea. Soon after that, we outflanked the Russians at Kiev and fully encircled like 40 or 50 divisions in the city, resulting in about 500,000 casualties for the CSTO, which I guess makes us about even.
Nice.
With more than 1 million CSTO troops wiped out in the past few encirclements, we finally reached the outskirts of Moscow. But surprisingly for the Russian Hoi4 AI, they actually fought quite hard for their capital city instead of the usual 1 understrength tank division. Still, that wasn't enough and Moscow fell soon after, so expect to see some photos of Gunther in the Kremlin on his X account. By now, it was practically over for the Russians. They did try to make a last stand at Volgograd, but come on, you already used this trick in 1942, it's not gonna work again. With all of Russia west of the Urals completely under our control, the Second European War was finally over.
But we were occupied by Russia for 10 long years, and we have not forgotten how terrible that is.
Well, Russia has been fully decolonized and split into a dozen completely stable and democratic nations. And by the looks of these borders, Gunther may have some British ancestry he doesn't know about. Gunther had brought democracy and freedom to Europe once and for all, but the job was far from done.
Job's not finished. Job finished?
We still had to finish off the authoritarian dictatorships of Turkey and Iran, which did not take very long. Once those two were out of the way, we turned our focus to the Middle East, and now was the time to remind the Libyans what NATO air power can do to a country. While setting up our naval invasions into North Africa, we went in to liberate Syria from Bashar's dictatorship. But somehow, the Syrian army lasted longer against the combined armed forces of Europe than it did against a bunch of guys in armored pickup trucks.
Attack the D-point!
Anyway, our naval invasion of Tunisia was a success and we rapidly expanded from our beachhead into the rest of North Africa. Side note, I'll never get how Libya, which has been in a civil war since 2011, was able to magically conquer half of North Africa in this mod, but that's just me. On the Syrian front, we managed to bypass the entire front line and rush straight into the Suez, capturing most of Egypt without much resistance. At the same time, we trapped half of Gaddafi's army in Algeria, allowing us to blitzkrieg into the eastern side of Libya once Egypt had capitulated. In a few weeks, our divisions were already closing in on Tripoli, and let's just say, LiveLeak got another video. With the capitulation of Gaddafi's regime, the war had come to an end. North Africa, the Middle East, as well as Turkey and Iran would remain under permanent NATO occupation. Russia had been decolonized and given the gift of liberal democracy. Europe would forever be free and united. China and India were still around, of course, but as long as they didn't pose a threat directly, Gunther's work was done for the time being. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.